Washington, D.C.
Tonight, no end in sight. The U.S. and Iran signaling they are far from a peace deal as both sides escalate strikes and threats in the second week of renewed fighting. Oil continues to climb amid the tensions, and we'll discuss the broader impact with Rapidan Energy's Bob McNally. Also, the congressional clock is ticking. The U.S. House pushing ahead with a sweeping budget plan that includes tens of billions of dollars in additional Pentagon funding as Democrats eye a vote as soon as tomorrow on Iran war powers before the chamber leaves town for August recess. Plus, AI earnings test. Tesla shares sinking after a second quarter profit miss weighed down by spending on AI and product development, while Alphabet points to AI as a bright spot, with Gemini topping estimates. The report's presenting a pivotal test for the AI spend and the broader tech sector. Bloomberg Tech's Ed Ludlow standing by with all the details. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons.
And Joe, we begin tonight with developments in the war with Iran as the president is threatening to attack Iran's bridges and power plants today if they struck another vessel in the Strait, issuing that threat via True Social shortly before paying respect to service members killed in the Mideast during the conflict. Trump, alongside top military brass, attending the dignified transfer of fallen soldiers at Dover Air Force Base earlier today before flying to Georgia, where he spoke about the conflict with Iran before a packed crowd.
In fact, if you combine us and Venezuela, we have about 62% of the world's oil market. So we don't need straits. We don't need anything. We don't need the Hormuz Strait, but we do it because we have to do it, because we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon.
And joining us now for more from the North Lawn of the White House is Bloomberg's Courtney Subramanian. So, Courtney, we obviously heard from the president at length in Georgia today. What was his message?
Well, the day was supposed to be about his economic message, which Republicans hope will carry them through the summer with just a little over 100 days before the midterm elections. He was there talking about the Trump accounts, which are the savings accounts for children that the administration is touting as part of their affordability agenda. But as you noted, he started the day at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, where he presided over the dignified transfer of the 4 service members who were killed over the past week in the conflict with Iran, which just really underscores how much Iran looms over this administration. During his speech, he talked about Iran. He said that they're being hit hard and that they want to make a deal, but they're not yet ready to make a deal. He said every time they want to make a deal, they change it so that they're not ready yet. And I think that just points to all signs that this conflict is nowhere near an end. He did mention, as you said at the top, that the Strait does not matter to the U.S. But earlier in the day, he did issue this threat on True Social saying that the U.S. would bomb a power plant or bridge every time Iran strikes a ship in the Strait, just laying down a marker there and really pointing to the Strait continuing to be the central point of contention in the latest flare-up.
Which would be the definition of escalation. Courtney, you mentioned the president's trip to Dover today. We were just showing our viewers on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube images from the dignified transfer, as we're reminded that this is about more than cost, with that being debated right now, the financial cost on Capitol Hill. The president reminded, along with all of us, about the human cost of this war.
Yes, the president, the images of the president were quite searing, with him presiding over this dignified transfer. This, of course, is the 3rd time the president has been to Dover for a dignified transfer since the war began on February 28th, which brings the death toll to 18 service members. And, you know, I think raises real questions about how much more time, how much more money, and how many more service members will perish before this war, which he has declared over, really comes to an end. And I think that's a question the president and Republicans will have to answer when they return home for recess and continue to campaign ahead of November.
Courtney, thank you so much. Courtney Subramanian live from the North Lawn of the White House this evening on Bloomberg. I just got back from Capitol Hill, where I sat down with Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan, a former CIA analyst who served in Iraq and sits on the Armed Services, Homeland Security, Agriculture, and Veterans committees. We talked about the escalating war with Iran, the deaths of more American troops, and whether Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made the case for billions in additional funding before her committee this week.
I think most Americans were not looking to get into another prolonged war, right? As I served 3 tours in Iraq with the CIA, 20 years of war, the Americans, remember that in a very visceral way, the loss of blood and treasure. And I think we now find ourselves, in another round of Middle Eastern war. And I think the average American doesn't want to be there, particularly since they're paying for it, right? They feel it in the pump. He came up on the Hill. It's the first time we've actually heard any numbers associated with this war from May. And by my count, he's deeply undercounting the cost of this war. It's already cost the American. Yeah, I think just for what it's already cost the American people in the higher gas prices, fertilizer prices, it's $100 billion. But we think for the damage to our infrastructure in our bases overseas, the damage to our planes, to our ships, munitions, it's probably at least another $100 billion.
Not 37.5.
I think that's a part of it. I just don't think that's the total. I think they don't want to talk about the full price of this war because they're not in a good place on it. Either way, it's significant. And I think what many of us who are long supporters of the U.S. military, right? I was at the Pentagon for 7 years, is we want to support the warfighter, but you got to be transparent with the price of the war. You also have to spend the money you just got last year. And by our count, there's $80 billion that is unspent, liquid money that they were given in the big, beautiful bill. Just show your math if you want another trillion plus.
The Secretary said we're using that to update the military and make up for time lost in the Biden administration. Is that not the case?
I mean, look, everyone has to man up at a certain point and say, when you're in charge, you own stuff, right? Just like Biden inherited stuff from Trump, and people didn't give him any credit for that, right? Yes, so just own it and say, you got us into this war, explain to the American people what the cost is, and don't, fudge the figures.
So when the debate is over and it's time to vote on things like the NDAA, on this supplemental request, never mind the $1.5 trillion that the president is asking for the Pentagon, Republicans are going to be making commercials with every Democratic no vote. Have these become a proxy for the war in Iran?
I think that's why we're stuck, is because the American people are just not supportive of a long-term war. But look, at the end of the day, you do have U.S. military in harm's way. I can't think of a single person who wants to keep things from their hands. But again, this is easy. Be transparent, and we can move forward. I think we have a responsibility as the branch of government that does the money. Show us your math, and we're happy to have that conversation.
You must have a personal conversation with yourself, though, as a veteran, someone who served in harm's way, knowing we've got 50,000 men and women bobbing around for some time now outside the Strait of Hormuz. Some of them could be deployed. The idea of voting no to fund military operations, I'm sure, would be a struggle for you, no?
Well, first of all, I'm not a veteran. I'm a CIA officer.
Understood.
I served alongside the military, just to be clear.
Yes.
But look, there's no more sobering video that any of us will ever see than what's about to happen at Dover Air Force Base with the latest 3 folks in uniform, including a 19-year-old coming home in a coffin, right? The cost of war is real. It's not some video game somewhere far away. And I'm someone who's always been on the Armed Services Committee. I support the military. I believe in a strong leadership role for the United States of America. But I also have basic responsibilities to my voters and my taxpayers to understand the money and the plan to get out of this war. I mean, right now, that's a little hard to see, and he can't lay it out. Show me that. You owe the American people that, and we can have a real conversation about funding.
I want to point us to some more domestic issues, but I'd first love your take on what's happening in Saudi Arabia. The president approving this plan for a nuclear enrichment program for their own power uses, exactly what we will not allow Iran to have. Some are calling this the start of what could be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Does this make us safer?
So look, for many of us who have worked on or in the Middle East for a long time, it was like this very big thing to ever think about any other country getting a nuclear capability. And the president is now announcing that the Saudis are going to get a nuclear capability with our help. And I think what's interesting about it, the timing, is the Saudis are getting this deal after decades of asking for it, because they're unhappy with how this war is going, and they're getting caught in the middle. I mean, Saudi's been in the middle of this whole thing. UAE is getting some of our most advanced AI chips. Jordan, they just had a deal announced. It is not by accident that all this stuff is being announced in the wake of this war, because those Gulf states are where Iran is shooting, quite literally, and killing people. So it is definitely a new page. There's a new moment going on in the Middle East, and a lot of the things we always talked about. I mean, you take a Middle East 101 class, and the Strait of Hormuz is going to come up, and that the Iranians have a veto over that. We're in a new era. The Middle East is changing very quickly, and it is to be determined whether we are safer with that reorganized Middle East.
That's supposed to come to Congress, by the way, this enrichment program. Would you vote against it?
I'd have to understand it. Yeah. Obviously, a civilian nuclear program is very different from something becoming a military nuclear program. Saudi Arabia is someone who's a partner that we haven't been in a state of an adversarial relationship for 50 years the way we have with Iran. Yeah. So I'm, again, like I actually care about details, and I care about those kinds of things. So I'm not an automatic no. No.
Continuing resolution is going to come your way, it looks like, at some point to fund the government through the election. This is where we are now. Before August recess, you need a CR to keep the government from shutting down ahead of an election. Are you on board?
Well, the government will unfortunately run out of money the 30th of September, so we're trying to get ahead of that. I don't know a single person who's proud of the way that we are managing our relationships up here. Our politics is unhealthy. We are unwell in our politics, and the money for funding the government is kind of falling victim to that. I will do a lot to keep the government from shutting down again. I think it helps no one. I was a career government employee. It was horrible when the government shut down. So I think it's, at this point, probably the most realistic option.
Let's talk cars.
Please.
This is something where we see a Democrat and a Republican getting something done. You had a big day today. It's the Connected Vehicle Security Act of 2026, which you and Senator Moreno joined us to talk about when you first introduced the bill. Came out of committee. Do you have the votes on the floor?
It came out of the committee unanimously, Democrats and Republicans. We had industry on board, GM, Ford, Toyota. We had UAW, steelworkers. I mean, it has been a huge effort for months to get to this point. And I think today was the first hurdle, big hurdle. And now we are like angling any way we can to get to this to the floor before the end of the year, hopefully sooner. I think there's the bipartisan support shows that we will have the votes on the floor. Nothing in this place is easy, so we're going to keep like bobbing and weaving. And I really appreciate Senator Moreno. He's from Ohio, so as a Michigander, I'm set up not to like anyone from Ohio. But I think in addition, like we're Democrat and Republican, we disagree on a lot of things, a lot of serious things. But on this issue, we are aligned, and in this case, it really paid off.
What do you make of the criticism from the likes of Senator Ted Cruz? He's calling out this 15% threshold on Chinese ownership. He says it's a UAW attack on Mercedes. Senator Moreno suggested maybe there's a waiver as a solution. How are you seeing it?
So basically what the bill says is we're going to ban any Chinese company from selling cars in the United States. And if you're a company like Volvo or Mercedes who has a lot of Chinese ownership, we're going to have to work on that because if you've got over 15% ownership by China, we got a problem. That's influence over that company in a very real way. We give them till 2030 to deal with that issue, right? You can sell, you can change ownership, you can do a bunch of things. You can also apply for a waiver. We have a way that if you make a compelling case for a short term that you can't get out of Chinese ownership, we're willing to hear it. But this wasn't targeted at any one car company. We want them to continue selling cars in the United States of America. We really just say, like, you can't have a serious influence from the Chinese Communist Party in what you do in America.
Interesting.
And those cars are driving surveillance collectors. I mean, full motion video, 3D mapping, geolocation. They can be remotely piloted from Beijing. I can't, as a former CIA officer and as a Michigander, in good faith, say that they should be sold in the United States.
Understood. Just lastly and quickly, is crypto something else that Democrats and Republicans might be able to produce together? There's new language today on an ethics clause for the Clarity Act. Are you assuaged when you think about the Trump family involvement?
Yeah, I haven't read the newest version that's come out. I do think it's an area where it's like a new thing, right? Cryptocurrency is new, and so there's interesting coalitions of Democrats and Republicans.
And your ag committee has a say.
Yeah, I would just say the fact that the president's sons have made over $1 billion in cryptocurrency puts a new spin on the requirements of this law. And in a different world, we wouldn't be talking about the president and his family enriching himself, but they're making a ton of money off of this stuff. So that ethics language better be significant, and it better affect the family. Not just the president himself, but the family, because they're milking the cow of America for their benefit right under our noses.
Wow.
Our thanks to Joe and Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan for that great interview on Capitol Hill earlier. Meantime, on Wall Street, two tech giants reported after the bell, with Tesla falling in the after-hours trade after reporting profit well short of expectations, and Alphabet forecasting even higher capex than was previously expected. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg tech host Ed Ludlow, live from San Francisco. So, Ed, there's two capex stories here. Alphabet, obviously, with higher capex than expected. Tesla capex is looking like it's not keeping pace with what the company has promised, and profit was lower. So let's start there. What's behind it?
Yeah, I mean, Wall Street wants Tesla to spend money that allows them to make progress on their future businesses, robotaxi and on humanoid robots. And you look at where CapEx has been the first 2 quarters of this year, they're not even tracking to their existing guide of $25 billion. R&D expenses were high. In the quarter gone, they had record deliveries for vehicles, but those vehicles were at lower selling prices on average. There was high stock-based compensation, and yes, okay, there's some evidence of R&D spend, but there was so little to go on in the deck. So we're about to have the first earnings call since Elon Musk became the CEO of 2 ginormous public companies because of SpaceX's IPO last month, and maybe we'll learn some more about the future and the roadmap to those future business lines, but that's the story there.
All right, let's get into Alphabet. The shares have turned decidedly lower after bouncing around for a while, Ed. The headlines look great. What are we upset about?
Yeah, so there was an expectation that Alphabet could raise its capital expenditure guidance for this year, and an acknowledgement that if it went higher, that would be negative for the stock. So the stock being down 4% isn't a surprise. They're now saying that CapEx would be up to $205 billion. At the high end of the previous guide, that was $190 billion. In the quarter gone, the only place that Google's numbers weren't perfect was on search, a slight miss relative to Wall Street or sell-side expectations, but there's just so many data points. I'm not just going to read numbers at you, Joe Matthew. What you need to know is that Google's AI business has a lot of momentum. Google is saying that AI is driving search growth. Google is saying that adoption of Gemini, 950 million active users, is growing. And so that's really the story there. More relevant to the future of this country over the next 12 months, clearly they're committed to spending, but they're now also being robust in talking about their use of third-party compute supply. So Google will be doing deals all around the US to try and get more compute with other companies as well.
Fascinating. It's going to have a lot to do with the direction of travel for tech tomorrow on Wall Street. Ed, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. We'll be curious to hear what you think about the call. The president, meantime, threatening action against Iran's bridges and power plants in what is now the 11th consecutive day of strikes. Will we go on to 12? We'll get fresh reaction to that. Strong words from Zohran Mamdani against Benjamin Netanyahu when Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, joins us up ahead. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for spending part of your Wednesday with us. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not welcome in New York City. The mayor says his city cannot execute an international arrest warrant citing alleged war crimes brought by the International Criminal Court for Netanyahu's role in Gaza. But Mamdani is calling on the federal government to take action. President Trump responding, saying that will not happen in, quote, any way, shape or form, unquote, while Netanyahu is in the U.S. for meetings. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, is now pushing back on Mayor Mamdani, and he joins us right now to talk about this and the ongoing war with Iran. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Now that you know this is not going to happen, I'm just curious your thoughts on the conversation that was happening in advance. Would the Mossad have allowed this to happen? Would New York City police have had a standoff with Israeli law enforcement?
Thank you for having me, Joe. We knew from the beginning that it was a stunt, a political stunt of the mayor who wanted to distract the attention from his failures as a mayor, and he picked on Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu knew from a long time ago that he will be coming to the city, he will come to the UN, he will speak in the General Assembly. So it was a political stunt, and we treated it that way. And we know it's baseless. The U.S. is not part of the ICC. There is no jurisdiction for the mayor. You know, I think Mayor Mamdani should be arrested. I know it will not happen, but I think he should be arrested.
On what grounds, Ambassador?
Oh, to my opinion, he promotes anti-Semitism. He sides with Hamas. A few weeks ago, he mourned the death of a Hamas terrorist. And a few days ago, he sent his commissioner to meet with the UN Ambassador of Iran at the same time that the US soldiers are fighting the regime. So I know it will not happen. So it's legitimate to play a political game. But if someone should be arrested, it's Mayor Mamdani, not Prime Minister Netanyahu. We know that is the case, and that's why we are not worried about it from the beginning.
Are you actually calling for Mayor Mamdani to be arrested, or is this, too, a verbal stunt, to use the language you used about Mamdani's statement about your prime minister?
If someone should be arrested, this mayor. You know, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not familiar with the legislation in the U.S., whether he's allowed to threaten an ally, whether he's allowed to defy the decision of the federal government not to be part of the ICC. He's playing his game. You know, it's part of his campaign. I know that, you know, it's hard for him to deal with the promises he made about the garbage in New York, about free buses. You know, you are in D.C., I'm in New York. The city is still dirty. There are no free buses. You know, he spoke about affordable housing. I have a long list to ask the mayor why he's dealing now with Netanyahu, with Hamas, with Iran, and instead of doing his job.
The fact of the matter is, though, you are allowed to have an opinion in this country, even if you don't like it, Ambassador, and you can't arrest somebody for promising free buses or dirty streets. Surely you don't think that the mayor should be arrested. What would he be charged with?
The same way that the mayor goes on TV 3 times a day calling for the arrest of our prime minister, we can do the same and call for his arrest. Okay.
Well, I think we understand the strokes of this conversation, Ambassador. I'd love to get your take on what's happening right now in the war with Iran. The president is making some pretty heavy threats. For every ship that is attacked, we will drop a bridge or a power plant, and maybe one close to Tehran. Does Israel support that approach? If another boat is attacked, should we knock the lights out in the capital city of Iran?
We trust the judgment of President Trump. He is leading the efforts today against this regime. You know, he was willing to make many compromises, and we know that they are playing games. As of now, we are not part of the war, but we are on high alert. If Iran will attack Israel, we are ready. We will punch hard. We will hit them hard, and they will be surprised to know that we have a lot of surprises in our capacity. So it's up to them to decide what they are doing. You know, they are attacking many allies of the U.S., UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait. If they will attack Israel, we will be ready for that.
Are you concerned that if the U.S. were to escalate its attacks that it's conducting on its own, that in retaliation for that, Iran will turn back toward attacking Israel?
I don't think war is the right word. We are prepared for that scenario. You know, we have meetings. We are, you know, life in Israel are normal. Everything is open. Restaurants are packed. A lot of traffic. But we are prepared for that, and our Air Force is ready to retaliate. And we have the capabilities to do that. It's up to the Iranians to decide if they want to expand the fronts, but we are ready. And if the U.S. will ask for our support, we will be there. We fought together against Iran in the past. If there will be a need or a request, we will be there again.
Mr. Ambassador, President Trump says that the U.S. May decide to bomb Pickaxe Mountain, or more importantly, what's below it, about 450 feet below the rock. There are reports, and the president was asked about this, that Israeli intelligence informed the United States that Iran moved thousands of centrifuges into the tunnels beneath Pickaxe Mountain. Can you confirm that intelligence, and do you support a strike?
Well, I cannot go into details, but I can tell you that we are sharing the intelligence that we acquire, and we have pretty good information about what's happening in Iran today. We are sharing it with our allies, especially with the U.S., and, you know, I cannot go to what's happening today, but, you know, we sent the Mossad agents to Tehran in 2018, and we got thousands of documents. And what we found there, that while they were negotiating with President Obama, the Iranians were lying all the way. So I think it's the same scenario today. They continue to spread lies, to believe in deception, and today we have the capability to expose it, so we'll continue to do that.
Well, Iran's nuclear program and nuclear efforts is one consideration. I would love your reaction, Ambassador, to the potential nuclear enrichment program that could start instead in Saudi Arabia. As the U.S. and the Saudis inked today a deal that would allow for nuclear technology sharing for a civilian program. Yes, American companies would be able to build reactors inside Saudi Arabia, but it could crack the door open to Saudi enrichment on its own. How does that sit with Israel?
Well, I have seen the report a few minutes ago. You know, I think we're going to have to learn what it means, this declaration, what is the idea behind it, whether it's civilian usage, whether it's for producing energy or research. But I'm sure that President Trump and the team in Washington are aware of the potential of acceleration of this issue in the Middle East. Nobody wants to see a nuclear race in the region. We will have to read it and learn it and to discuss it with our allies in Washington.
Is that what this is, Ambassador, the start of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East?
I hope not. We have to wait and see what it includes. You know, it depends whether you allow the Saudis in this agreement to enrich uranium inside Saudi Arabia or not. There are a lot of details into that, and I think we have to learn the details before and to see where it goes.
Well, speaking of seeing where things go, President Trump hosted the Lebanese president in the Oval Office yesterday. And as you look to the way forward between Israel and Lebanon, or Israel and Hezbollah, more specifically, how close are we to a long-term resolution to that, for Israel to feel that it no longer faces an existential threat from the north, and for other parties in the Middle East to feel that there actually is going to be not another front that Iran is able to exploit in negotiations with the war with the U.S.?
We welcome the dialogue with the Lebanese. I think the Lebanese leadership have proved that they are brave enough to make strong statements against Hezbollah, against Iran. Hopefully they are ready to gain independence finally. We have signed an MOU with Lebanon, and we want to thank Secretary Rubio for facilitating those talks. But, you know, everything is in the details, and it's about implementation. We are starting to implement the agreement as we speak. Hopefully it will work through. And the challenge is on the shoulders of the Lebanese. They have to prove that they are capable of pushing back Hezbollah from the border with Israel. We want them to be there. We want them to show that they are independent. And I hope that the day that Lebanon will be a free country is very soon. You know, there is a serious leadership today in Beirut, and we are willing to work with them.
Ambassador, Bloomberg Television and Radio is prepared to host a debate tomorrow at the United Nations for the candidates to be the next Secretary General. That is, I presume, a contest that you will be producing a vote for. Who or what would you like to see?
First, we want to see a change. The UN must reform. It was established after the Second World War, you know, with great ideas, but look, today they are not relevant. They are not in the negotiating a peace treaty with Ukraine and Russia, not in the Middle East, not with Iran. So I think we all agree that it should be reformed. And also the Secretary General, he failed completely. Secretary General Guterres unfortunately failed, and that's why we are sure that whoever will be elected will be much better than the existing situation.
All right, Ambassador, thank you for joining us. Israeli Ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, thank you so much. And as Joe mentioned, a quick programming note, make sure to tune in tomorrow as Bloomberg presents a special town hall with the candidates seeking to become the next UN Secretary General. That'll be live from UN headquarters Thursday, starting at 5 p.m. Eastern. And of course, one of the mounting global challenges they could be discussing in that forum, the fear of a chokepoint problem for global energy markets that is driving oil prices higher. Brent crude briefly topping $95 a barrel once again today amid ongoing hostilities around the Strait of Hormuz and with threats from Houthi rebels to close off the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia. Rapidan Energy Group put 65% odds on the Houthis targeting vessels bound for Saudi ports, and its president and CEO Bob McNally is joining us now in studio for more. So, Bob, on the notion of this, the headline just crossed the terminal that the Houthis are saying they targeted 2 Saudi oil tankers in the Red Sea. You had greater than even odds on this happening. It seems like it may be coming to fruition right now.
Right, Kayleigh. I'm afraid it is. Round 2-0 of the military conflict of this is going to be broader than probably round 1-0 was, unfortunately. You know, the Houthis have the capability, we believe, to actually destroy the Yanbu terminal. That would even be worse. So in some ways, we would be lucky if all they did was take some shots at some ships and things. And hopefully that won't expand. And if they do, we can suppress that. But the risks are great, not only to shipping, but also to energy infrastructure, which on the oil side, so far, whether it's in the Gulf or the Red Sea, has avoided, damage.
Rapidan has had some of the best analysis geopolitically and specific to the energy market since this started. Bob, you and your colleagues are experts on this, and I know that you probably don't want to be right about most of these things, but you've turned out to be. If 2.0 is worse than 1.0, do we retest the highs of $120 a barrel?
Yeah, I begin every briefing and comment with, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong about what I'm about to say. Look, the reason we didn't go higher is we had some one-offs and some buffers that were used, strategic stocks. China went on a crash diet, but we know a crash diet, you can't live that way forever. When you come off of it, you're pretty hungry, and China's coming back. And we were able to sneak out some more oil in June. The military did a good job at that. But as we look into the fall, we've exhausted those buffers, and increasingly prices are going to have to do the work. So to answer your question, well, Rapidan, we're looking at a low $100 range, 100 to 110 in the coming weeks. But the risk is way to the upside, because even as we sit here today, even at $94 Brent, there's enormous optimism in the price. One of the distinctive features of this whole thing has been an entrenched optimism among traders. Look at equities, haven't even looked back since early April. And I think that optimism is unwarranted. And I think that bubble could burst. And if so, we are going to reprice much higher, I'm afraid.
But a lot of it could be dependent on China, as we don't have a lot of transparency into how much they had at the onset or how much they may have now. How much are they going to hold potentially in the way OPEC used to, the future of global energy prices, at least for a time, in their hands?
Well, so far they've been acting as that swing refiner, swing importer, if you will. I think there were some reports that they actually resold some cargoes of crude they had bought. So, but we think at Rapidan, we think they're starting to come back. They want to resume this fall that SPR, strategic inventory filling. They're going to let their refiners make some money. They want to chase these record high refining margins. One of the reasons they cut back is they said their refiners, nope, we're going to cut back on imports. Well, now they're letting them chase those margins. So we think China's going to be creeping up in its imports by a couple million barrels a day into the fall. No sign they were willing to dump a lot of their strategic stocks. They're using some of them, but not a lot. So China only goes so far. And like I said, we've pretty much spent, we're close to doing all the SPR releases. So we're out of buffers. Demand curtailment through price increases will have to do the work going forward if this persists.
Well, the president said today, a short time ago in Georgia, that we don't need the Straits, the word that he used. Realizing this is a global market, how could that be true?
Yeah, well, it's true in a physical sense. We don't import much from there. But it's incorrect in a price sense. As you say, the oil market is global. Supply disruption everywhere leads to a price increase everywhere, including here. Gasoline's now $4.06 and rising. Diesel's over $5 a gallon. The president has also learned and seen over and over again that when prices rise, it becomes an issue for us. And those strategic stocks aren't really about, or our import dependence is not so much about where we physically get the oil, right? Because we do import crude still. We get it from safe places. That hasn't been our issue. The issue is our vulnerability to these price shocks. Remember, we have low taxes, right? The rest of the world pays a much higher tax. So they don't see that volatility. But we Americans, we see it in the pump price right away. Doesn't make us happy. So we need Hormuz in the sense of we need stable oil prices.
Well, and you mentioned diesel prices. Obviously, a factor in that as well is Russia, which has had a number of refineries hit, which now has a ban on its own diesel exports, and which potentially, depending on the action of the United States Congress, could be facing tighter sanctions in the form of secondary tariffs that will be applied to buyers of its energy. We were told by Senator Rand Paul on Capitol Hill last night that sanctions package could lead to economic catastrophe for that reason. And I wonder how you're viewing it.
Well, I think the bill will also give the president some authority to implement it, and I think he'll use that and so forth. But you're right. Look, just as with crude oil, we had these offsets. With products, it went the wrong way. The second largest diesel exporter after the United States, Russia, 40%, 50% of its refining capacity is gone. It banned it. China, as I said earlier, they curtailed exports of refined products. So we kind of went negative. And if you look at those markets, it's a tale of two markets. Crude has been kept contained. It's starting to go up again. Refined products are super tight, margins at all-time highs, and rising still.
So we're seeing shares of Valero, Marathon hit new all-time highs on a daily basis. They have charts like tech companies right now. How vulnerable are we to a refining shock? We're walking into the real part of hurricane season. Any number of things could go wrong on the Gulf Coast when we have such limited capacity. You said it, $4.06. Where are we going for gas?
No, you're right. And my colleagues on the refining side and the oil analysis side pointed out that when you run your refineries hot, and we have been, utilization rates at 95% persistently over and over again, I mean, you delay maintenance, you choose to run that refinery, but at some point, these refineries need work. They need downtime and repairs and things. And as we get into the fall, we're going to need to do that work. At the same time, these margins are going to be great. And then comes the risk of storms, unplanned outages. And we do see it's about 500,000 to 600,000 barrels a day of refining capacity is at risk to unplanned outages when you've sort of driven your refineries so hard for so long. So it is a precarious thing. You know, look, going into the July 4th weekend, it was a different world, right? Brent had retraced back to $70, and the market was betting on a sort of ballet, an elegant normalization of Hormuz just as these buffers wore off, and then hopefully kill that refining tightness. But it's not working out that way.
A sober view of the market, but always an informed one from Bob McNally. We appreciate it very much, Bob, your insights, as always. He's the founder and president, Rapidan Energy Group, with us live on Bloomberg. Coming up, the clock ticking down for Congress to push through its growing list of must-pass legislation as the August recess nears. Our political panel is on hand with much more ahead, only on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Think about it. To say that members of Congress cannot purchase any equities, that would be a big deal. So I'll support it, however. I always have a however. My problem is they added the SAVE Act, of which I'm the author and I support loudly, to the stock trading bill. Now, the purpose of that is to make it partisan. The purpose of that is to score political points. I don't like that way of doing things. Like, look, I'm happy we're in an election. You got to go win the election. But I want to have a straight up or down vote on stock trading. I want everybody to have to go in front of the American people on a one-subject bill and tell them what they think is right. And if they want to amend it, offer an amendment. If they don't, then vote up or down.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew. And that was Texas Republican Congressman Chip Roy on the early edition of Balance of Power today, calling on Congress to pass a stricter bipartisan ban on stock trading by lawmakers. In the last hour, the House did pass a different, more limited stock trading measure, one that was paired with new voter identification requirements that were opposed by Democrats, though it did pick up some Democratic votes. And they also cleared a must-pass defense authorization and a budget resolution to provide supplemental funding to the Pentagon. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Erik Wasson live on Capitol Hill. So, Erik, it was a laundry list of things that the House wanted to get done before the recess, and wow, they actually did it. How did this all come together?
Yeah, it's a big victory for Speaker Mike Johnson, really holding his caucus together. There's been a lot of infighting among Republicans. They were able to actually get the defense bill and the stock trading bill done with the help of some moderate Democrats, I will add, and to unite the conference on this $95 billion Iran war budget. This is a vote that puts a lot of swing district members on the record, essentially supporting funding a war that's very unpopular, has raised consumer prices ahead of the midterms. It's heading to the Senate now, where Senate Majority Leader John Thune is not enthusiastic about it at all. I don't expect it to get any action before the Senate leaves for their August recess, and maybe not until after the election. There is about $75 billion in money that the Pentagon can access. This came up in the hearing yesterday with the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. So I think that they will be able to keep the ship running, but it will have to come to Congress eventually to plus up the munitions and other accounts that have been drained by the Iran war.
Reports would suggest John Thune has a couple of different ideas, Erik, and I'm sure that you've been talking with him, maybe even stitching all of these together for one big vote in the upper chamber. Is that how this ends?
It could be, but what I'm hearing right now is that Democrats and Republicans are working on a continuing resolution. That's the top order of business of avoiding the September 1st shutdown. The House cleared a bill late last night to extend government funding from September 30th to December 4th. That version is not copacetic in the Senate. They need to add some White House requests, some other items that both parties want. But it sounds like talks are going pretty well, and I expect the Senate to clear something in the next 2 weeks before they go home for their own recess, and the House will take that up. But the wider Iran war funding, of course, this continual battle about voter ID and the SAVE Act, really continues to bedevil them. Meanwhile, in the Senate, we have a crypto bill that was released with a lot of fanfare from Republicans, but we're hearing a lot of negative sentiment from Democrats and even from some in the banking industry. So, it's a full plate of problems for John Thune, and he's going to be trying to work those out in the next 2 weeks.
All right, Erik, thank you. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson with us live from Capitol Hill. Love the bow tie. And joining us now is our political panel. Democratic strategist, senior advisor at the Burway Group, Roger Fisk. Sarah Chamberlain is here, too, president CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Great to see both of your smiles and welcome. Sarah, we'll start with you. Speaker Johnson pulls another rabbit out of the hat.
He sure did. It certainly helps when you've got Camp David that you can take members to.
Is that how that worked out?
That's yeah. He took members there the past 2 weekends to really sit down and discuss. It was a little shaky yesterday on the rules vote, but we got there. We're pleased to say. So the members are very happy. They'll go home tomorrow and in much better position than they thought maybe they were going to be. The speaker still has one of the toughest jobs in town, and he keeps pulling it out.
Well, and he did so today with the help from Democrats on a few of these measures, including the NDAA. Roger, are you surprised by that?
Not necessarily, and it's wonderful to see Sarah and both of you. The NDAA, it's one of the last bastions of where people presume some level of bipartisanship, so that doesn't completely surprise me. I think on balance, like the SALT or the moderate Republicans out there probably got one step forward with the stock ban, but then one step taken back by being forced to vote on the war. Because now you have something that is going to be relatively recent in people's memory, and that it's not aspirational, because had this administration gone about it like many previous ones would have been, that there would have been a vote to approve the use of force and then actually a price tag. This has now been backfilled, so it's bad money on top of bad policy. And that's going to be very difficult to sell. So the moderate Republicans could have had a good win to go out there and talk about, but I think a lot of the bloom comes off that rose with having to vote on the Iran war.
Interesting. I asked Senator Slotkin earlier in the broadcast if the opposite could also be true. Republicans want to make ads out of Democrats voting no on money to support the troops, right? That's going to be pretty easy to do here. Will it work?
That's exactly what we're going to do. And we are going to promote the fact that the Republicans are there on the stock bill. That's a huge issue out in America. They think members of Congress come here to get rich.
Well,
some have certainly.
We've got ETFs tracking certain politicians.
We do, but overall, the vast majority of them do not. But Brian Stile, who, full disclosure, is an active Main Street member, it's his legislation. It's a great bill.
So you brought this up without being asked because this is a winner to run on. Am I right?
This is absolutely one to run on. We are planning to run on this in some of the tougher districts. It is a win back home.
Yeah.
Well, and it got through the House. The Senate's another question. Frankly, the Senate's another question for every bill that the House passed today, Roger.
I'm reminded, I always go back to this Ross Dinkowski bio for some reason, but he said to a staff person, he said, don't ever forget, the other team is our opponent, but the Senate is our enemy. So the age-old tension between the chambers.
That's not changed.
But I agree with your colleague. I think the Senate is going to go in the CR direction, pushing it past the election because that makes the most sense in a lot of ways. And then once you have a deadline that's past the election, that gives everyone a little bit more room to get through their cycle and et cetera. So that's how I think the Senate will play out.
What do you think every time a Republican lawmaker comes on the air, we'll just use our show as an example, and says Democrats have been planning for months to shut down the government in September so they can leverage this for the election?
I understand why they would say it.
Are they right?
I don't think so. I mean, if you subscribe to the idea that Democrats love government, which I think is largely true, then shutting down the government is, the absolute antithesis of Christmas, right? So I get it in a shallow kind of surface political way.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, Democrats think about kind of like the human impact of something like that, setting aside the credit rating issues and any number of other things, and don't look at it as something that is to be, encouraged.
From the Republican side, we do think they like to shut down the government. They've done it. Chuck Schumer, I'm not sure how many Republican senators still trust him. So we feel on our side, Democrats do like to shut it down. Maybe they get brownie points for doing that and political points, maybe not. But we are very pleased. I think I said last time I was on the show, we could be heading towards the government shutdown. We'll be very pleased.
Are you feeling more optimistic here then?
Much more optimistic
the Senate will
this
take
week.
Care of it.
Yeah,
all right.
Much more. Thank God. We cannot have another government shutdown.
Well, I wonder politically, Sarah, if the Republican Party feels that we cannot have any more troop deaths in the Middle East as well. The president once again today had to go to Dover Air Force Base to attend the dignified transfer of 4 fallen service members. And the war in the Middle East is not yet over. He's, in fact, threatening to escalate it further by targeting power plants and bridges, maybe even in Tehran. Is that what the Republican Main Street Caucus wants to see? How long can they continue to stand behind that?
They do not want to see any more deaths. I mean, obviously. And actually, we were at the base in Jordan just a few years ago. We did not meet with either one of the people who lost their lives, but we were there. It was an amazing base, but we do not want to see this happening, obviously. One of the mothers lives in one of our members' congressional districts, so he was there with the president. But it's a shame. We don't ever want to see any loss. However, we are in a conflict, and this is what happens, unfortunately. Yeah. And we have to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. We're there, and we have to finish this. We have to escalate it to get it done so we can move on.
Okay. So you support the president on this.
We have to get this over with.
You remember what General Ben Hodges told us a couple of days ago here. He believes this will still be underway in November. What does that mean?
I think he's probably accurate, and I think that's going to be a problem if it is. It depends on the price of gas. Not yet. No, with all the redistricting and our members are running on local issues, I'm not ready to write off the House yet. It's going to be very close, though.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and weigh in on this, Roger. You, of course, worked for a president who also had to contend with the wars in the Middle East that at one time President Trump was running against engaging in. Talk to us about the dynamics inside a White House who, to Sarah's point, very much doesn't want to be on the losing side of this, does have the ambition of not wanting a nuclear Iran, and yet has to grapple with the consequences and the costs.
Yeah, I mean, if a White House is really good and disciplined and well-oiled and well-structured, maybe 15 or 20% of its bandwidth, collectively and the president's bandwidth, can be focused on forward, proactive agenda. Because when you're in the White House, or you work for it, like I did, not in it, but for it, most of your bandwidth is driven by forces beyond your control, plagues, strikes, storms, et cetera. So that is difficult enough. And then you factor in, what you were just chatting about, the troops returning and all that. And then, unfortunately, I do think that the foundation of all this is the President of the United States saying last summer that their capacity was obliterated. And I think he's declared victory 25 times now since that's why, not the last time I was here, but a couple times ago, it's feeling very COVID reminiscent for me. The daily declarations of victory, the casual dismissals of data that's inconvenient, the chastising of elected officials or public officials that have any kind of opinion separate, the chest thumping, the self-celebration, all that stuff, to me, is very reminiscent of 2021 and 22. And so for the frontline Republicans, they, I think, need to sink their teeth into this stock ban, try to go at Dems as best they can over whether or not they voted for this defense authorization, because I think the foundation, the tactics, and the messaging, and how the president conducts himself every day around this Iran thing is incredibly difficult, because I think he's not being straight with the American people, and they pick up on that.
Oh, that's really interesting, Roger. The president's in Georgia right now. He's stumping for Mike Collins. Does he help the Republican brand in a state like Georgia?
Depends on where he is.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on what district he is.
Okay.
I mean, what state he's in.
It's a complicated state.
It's complicated. Georgia's very complicated. I'm sure he's in the part of Georgia that welcomes him. And there is part of that in Georgia. There's also a part that he'll never go in Georgia. But he is very selective into what congressional districts and what states he goes into.
Yeah.
Mega, as we've seen in Arizona last night, it was mega still south.
Andy Biggs
came through. So, it just is state by state and district by district.
Yep.
We have 20 seconds left, Roger. Does John Ossoff want President Trump to spend more time in Georgia? Does that work for him?
Based on his record of choosing U.S. senators, the answer is yes.
All right, we'll leave it there. Roger Fisk and Sarah Chamberlain, our political panel this evening. Thank you both so much for joining us. And make sure to tune in tomorrow at this time as Bloomberg presents a special town hall with the candidates seeking to become the next UN general, live from UN headquarters at 5 p.m. Eastern here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
That means Kelly and Joe get to watch TV. See you tomorrow on Bloomberg.